Welcome to Perspective and Potential, where we uncover new ways to see the world and tap into the incredible potential within each of us. I'm Abigail Straight, joined by my co-host and mother, Gwen Fund. Together, we'll explore ideas, stories, and strategies designed to help you grow, shift your perspective, and embrace a fuller, more empowered version of yourself. So whether you're looking for a major life change or just curious about small shifts you can make today, we are here to inspire, support, and encourage you every step of the way. Want to learn more about us? You can visit us at perspectiveandpotential.com. Thanks for being here. Let's get started and see where a fresh perspective can take you. We've been talking a lot about happiness lately. Last time we spoke specifically about forgiveness and how learning to forgive leads to a happier life. Well, today we're diving into another topic that's both deeply personal and universally relatable, and another one of our foundational attributes to living a happy life, and that is spirituality. Now, spirituality can be a controversial subject, as people have differing ideas on what spirituality actually means. In this episode, we're going to explore how embracing spirituality can actually benefit our bodies, our mental well-being, and ultimately our happiness. It's another foundational piece in living a fulfilled, balanced life. So, to start, let's talk about the connection between our spirituality and our mental and physical health.
Okay, well, even though spirituality can be a broad topic with all the many different religions and personal views on what it means to be spiritual, in the end, spirituality helps to give our lives purpose and meaning. It connects us to other like-minded believers and to a higher power that guides and comforts us through the turbulence of life. And also, spiritual people are more likely to make healthier lifestyle choices that lead to a healthier and increased life expectancy. And it's been found that 10 to 20 minutes of regular prayer and meditation can decrease our metabolism, decrease heart rate, decrease breathing rate, and slow and calm our brain waves. So I think we need to look at each of these things and how they relate to our level of happiness. So let's start with how it connects us to other people. We know that positive, close relationships are the number one essential in personal happiness. And we also know that positive personal relationships are fundamental in our early attachment and development, and that those early relationships also correlate with a person's happiness later in life.
I mean, that makes sense. So if we grow up feeling secure in our relationships, then we're more likely to carry that sense of security into adulthood. But what does the research say about how all of this ties together?
Well, I think we have to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs because it lays out the progression of human development pretty clearly. The foundation of our development is our basic human needs like food, water, sleep, and shelter. Mm-hmm. Now, all of these things are done for us in our infancy in one way or another. So, and then after those basic needs are met, we depend on others for our safety, stability, and protection. This, too, is provided for us by our caregivers in one way or another. The next layer on Maslow's chart is the development of love and belonging, our social interactions, intimate relationships, in other words, relationships of trust, friendships, and family. So through these early developmental stages, we come to our need for self-esteem. And have we learned to value and respect ourselves? And of course, we learn that if we have been valued and respected by others. Do we feel like we hold status? In other words, have we enjoyed a certain status within our family and peer group? Do we feel as though we can achieve our goals? In other words, have we been nurtured and encouraged in our capabilities?
That's really interesting. And I think in my own experience working with students, who are coming from very different environments, I can attest that self-esteem really, truly does seem to be built on the foundation of all of the earlier stages. So if we've been supported, we're more likely to believe in ourselves. Or if we've been dismissed or neglected, it absolutely affects our confidence.
Oh, absolutely. And finally, what Maslow calls the last stage in our development is something called self-actualization. In other words, can we strike out with confidence in our own creative ability and potential? And so if those first 4 stages have prepared us, then, oh my goodness, yes, we can do that. But a lot of times that's not the case. So how does spirituality play into that development? Well, if we start at birth, religious people generally see children as a gift from heaven, something to be grateful for and cherished. And in a spiritual environment, children are more likely to be valued and given everything they need during those first 4 stages of development. They tend to be nurtured in a positive and a loving way.
It's interesting because it seems that this foundation not only supports our happiness, but also equips us with a strong sense of purpose and belonging as we grow. So in a way, spirituality doesn't just impact our beliefs, it directly shapes our relationships, our sense of security, and even our confidence in ourselves. Because I don't think it's just about faith. It's about the way that faith influences how we care for each other and how we see ourselves in the world and how we see our relationship with a higher power. And so what I mean by that is when we feel like we rely on the divine, I feel like that innately gives us the ability to better understand how children have reliance on us. If I feel like I need to go and have a moment in prayer because I'm asking for something, how much more understanding might I be then when my children are coming and asking for something from me? And so is it possible then that having a belief in a divine power that values you allows us as parents to have a more empathetic approach with our own children?
Yes, but let me clarify something here. It really depends a lot on how we view this higher power. There are definitely some religious people who are not spiritual and who administer their religion in a way that is not positive or spiritual. They view God in kind of a vengeful way. But then there are other people who see this higher power as a heavenly father, a very loving father figure. And they're very spiritual without being confined to a strict religious practice. So most religions do focus on that loving kindness, compassion, sacrifice for the good of the group, and loving service to each other. Each of these admonitions teach us to be mindful of others around us and their needs, as well as our own. You help me, and I help you. This is how we can grow positive social groups that connect us to others and give us that confidence that we need as we try to go into our potential. We'll help other people, and they will help us. Studies like the one by Ellen Idler have shown that spiritual people tend to be more likable in general, and those attributes tend to carry over to other relationships throughout their lives.
Okay, so now how does being spiritual play into being physically healthier in general?
Well, because most religions embrace a health code and a reverence for the physical body as being the sacred holder of our soul. Consequently, these health codes tend to steer people away from self-indulgent behaviors that are damaging to their body. Things like gluttony, overeating, or eating unhealthy things, substance use, cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, street drugs, promiscuity, fighting, stealing, all of those things that put us in a very negative environment.
I think that's a very interesting way to look at it. Those morals, those health codes. I think a lot of people tend to see that, those religious guidelines or, again, health codes as restrictive. But in reality, they actually seem to be more about protection. So would you say they're designed to preserve not just physical health, but our mental and spiritual well-being too?
Oh, of course. It really isn't just about avoiding harm. It is about cultivating a lifestyle that allows for long-term well-being. And the research supports this. We know that people who embrace these health codes do enjoy a greater life expectancy in general and a healthier life throughout their lives. They usually have less cardiovascular disease. They seem to be better able to maneuver the trials and tribulations of life with a lot less serious stress, anxiety, and depression. One study suggested that spirituality was a character strength and a crucial factor in all of our character development.
And, I think that makes sense, right? When someone follows a spiritual or religious path, they are often practicing those skills of discipline, self-control, and something we talk about here all the time, intentional living, right? In their choices. They're consciously making choices. And over time, I think just that way of living is bound to have an impact on our overall mental and emotional health too.
Yeah, we can actually see that like in addiction programs. Spiritual intervention programs tend to be more successful in the long run, and they contribute to mental health and well-being. So things like AA and NA, they help people find hope and meaning in their lives. And the connections that they forge with others through the program help them to find the reason and the strength to make those necessary changes in their lives.
Yeah, that's really powerful because it's not just about breaking an addiction. It's about transforming a person's entire perspective on life and also giving them that sense of community at the same time, that there's that belonging, what we just talked about earlier with that Maslow's hierarchy of needs. There's that sense of belonging. So do you think that's why these programs emphasize surrendering to a higher power?
Oh, yeah. Because recognizing something greater than ourselves can be incredibly motivating. It shifts our focus from our own weak willpower sometimes to a power with more strength than we have and a deeper sense of purpose and connection with our fellow members and the divine. So in speaking of connection, there is some really interesting research from a man named Bruce H. Lipton. He's a cell biologist by profession. He contends that the inner workings of any atom is energy. In fact, everything in the universe is ultimately made of energy, and that all things are connected via this energy. And they can be affected by the surrounding energy around them. Invisible things like thought and music. Now, that brings to mind a study from a real long time ago where they put plants in different rooms. One room played classical music constantly, and the other played heavy metal. So the plant in the classical music room flourished and grew, while the one in the heavy metal music room withered and died. So Lipton says that there's a form of intelligence within each of our cells that learns from the chemical encoding of our response to our surroundings. Now, this would explain the ill health that develops from negative environments and also the benefits of building and maintaining positive attributes like hope, love, and peace into our lives through spirituality and that connection with the higher power.
That's such a powerful study because, okay, if I kind of dip into playing devil's advocate here, right? Somebody might be listening and thinking, well, so are you saying that listening to heavy metal is bad? Well, I enjoy heavy metal. And I don't think we're trying to place labels of bad music versus good music, but I think the reality is that there was an impact on the two different types of music and the environment that it created. And I kind of compare it to hunger, right? I know that like when I'm starving and if there are, there's a box of donuts on the counter, I can look at that box of donuts and it sounds so good. Nothing would sound better than just diving into that donut. Or there's maybe a whole grain muffin, right? A whole bran muffin sitting on the side. And if I look at those two things, I know I'm going to feel differently depending on what I choose to eat. And so I think that the same goes for all of our choices, right? What we choose to eat, what we choose to listen to absolutely impacts our mental, physical, and, overall well-being because of the energy, that Lipton was referring to.
So, yeah, let me interject here quickly. If you look at the mathematics of music, classical music is pretty orderly. It goes up and it goes down, and it's mathematically, it's just,
It's sound.
Yeah. However, your rock music, especially your heavy metal, it tends to be more chaotic and random. It emotes feelings like anger. And so I think the plants in the heavy metal room were just responding to that chaos and doing accordingly. As Lipton says, our cells are very biologically affected by the energy around us.
So, speaking of intentional choices, something I'm sure our listeners are going to be curious about is how the intentional choices and actions of prayer and meditation not only impact our spirituality, but our overall well-being.
So Ellen Idler, again, her studies have shown that practices like meditation, prayer, attending worship services, going to quiet places of solitude, reading scripture, all these things help us to set time apart from the usual rush of our lives. And all of those things help to reduce our stress levels. And as we talked about in our stress episode, stress is a fundamental cause of chronic disease. So these transcendent spiritual and religious experiences have a positive, healing, and restorative effect on our bodies, especially if they're regular occurrences in our lives. Also, rites of passage associated with spiritual practice provide us with rules for living, and they're important in helping us in our pursuit of self-actualization. They give us the guardrails on our highway to growth and development and becoming the very best version of ourselves.
I think that's a really interesting way to put it. Guardrails. Do you think that's one reason why people often turn to spiritual traditions when they're searching for direction in life?
Oh, absolutely. The world can be a fuzzy shade of gray sometimes, but spiritual traditions help us bring our world into a sharper focus. The sense of belonging to a social group helps us to feel safe, loved, and important. As we study and then develop our connection with the highest and most holy, we feel ourselves lifted from the mundane to the ethereal. Our hope and confidence. All of our fatigue can be restored to allow us once again to move forward. We can discover more optimism, humor, gratitude, and flexible thinking and meaning within ourselves. We can pray for others and get outside our own problems, and we can feel good about helping somebody else.
I love that, because I feel again that it's an action, something within our control, an intentional choice that we can make that allows us to shift our focus outward, like you just said. So praying for others, serving others, or stepping outside of our own problems for just a moment. That alone, that choice, that one small step that we always talk about, can be a huge source of peace and perspective.
Oh, yeah. And there's opportunities for service, not just in church, but in our communities. If you really have that desire, if you've cultivated that within yourself, there is no shortage of opportunities for service. But let's go back to Bruce Lipton's book, The Biology of Belief. He ends his book with a chapter on how he, as a scientist, came to be a believer in spirituality. He came to understand that we are one with a bigger universal power, and that every protein, those little, peptides in our bodies, they complement something in our environment. He also discovered that each of us have a unique biological identity through the receptors on our cells. We know we all have unique fingerprints, but each of our cells have a unique identity in the way that these receptors are laid out. So he concludes that each of us is really a spirit, an energy force in material form. So what's even more compelling is that he notes that 5,000 articles a year are now being written on the impact of religion or spirituality on our health. And they reveal that medical and psychiatric patients commonly resort to religious and spiritual belief practices to cope with illness and stressful life changes. And that each of these practices help them to fare better and adapt more quickly than those who are less spiritual. In other words, he's telling us that spiritual beliefs have a direct, positive influence on our immune and endocrine systems, and that they're crucial for our health maintenance and our disease prevention.
And maybe that's the biggest takeaway here, right? That spirituality, as we've discussed today, is not about what happens, not just about, I should say, is not just about what happens after this life, but it is about how we live this one. So it's about finding peace, reducing stress, building strong relationships, connections, and even improving our own physical health. I mean, that's so powerful. If you feel those daily aches and pains, something as small as incorporating prayer and meditation more regularly in your life has the opportunity to have a significant impact on your physical health. So, whatever it is that we're doing to take that quiet moment to reflect, it's an opportunity for us to improve our overall health, mentally and physically, and our overall well-being. So as we come to a close, then let's pinpoint the most crucial points from our talk and consider how they apply to our daily lives. Today, we explored how spiritual practices help reduce stress, improve mental resilience, and even have a measurable impact on our physical health. We also talked about the power of community, the sense of belonging that comes from spiritual connection, and how our biology might actually reflect our spiritual nature. At the end of the day, spirituality, whatever that looks like for you, can be a powerful tool for living a healthier, more balanced life. It's not just about belief. It's about the daily practices and decisions that bring us peace, perspective, and connection. In our next episode, we're going to explore the topic of how the connections that we're seeking and longing for actually begin with us. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We'd love to hear from you. Please share your thoughts or suggestions for topics for future episodes through our website or social media. We've recently updated our page to include valuable resources that will assist you in your journey. Your input helps shape the conversation and makes perspective and potential even more impactful. We're Gwen and Abby, and you've been listening to Perspective and Potential. Until next time, keep exploring new perspectives and remember that every small change can lead to something big. Food for thought.
Bon appetit.